The jurors are back. Counsel for Commonwealth is present, as well as Mr. Miller and his attorneys. Defense, please call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The court please at this time the defense will call Mr. John Miller.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do so swear.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is John Bartholomew Miller.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Miller.
Good afternoon, Mr. Miller.
How old are you, sir?
64.
Where do you live? What's your home address?
I live at 1239 Brown Court, Bellefonte, Pennsylvania.
Who do you live with?
I live with my wife Joanne and her, well, at the time of these events, she was 7, now she's 9, her daughter Jewel.
And the location that you live with, can you briefly describe what location, what does it look like?
Well, I live in a complex of townhomes, and it's most of the units are 3 townhomes situated next to each other. I live in the middle unit, and it's a 3-story townhome. There's a basement, living, a kind of a kitchen and living room area, and then there's bedrooms upstairs.
Now, the location that you live at, are there townhomes that are adjoining or next to?
Yes, I lived in the middle unit.
And how many units actually surround your house?
I'm sorry?
How many units are we talking? We're talking
There's a
12?
unit on both sides of my home.
Okay. Now, before you lived in Pennsylvania, did you live in any other states?
I lived in California for a long period of time before I moved to Bellefonte.
And before you lived in California, let's talk about that. Did you ever serve in the military?
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I served in the United States Navy as a Navy corpsman. Basically, what a Navy corpsman does is there are a multitude of functions, but what I did is I served as a combat medic. I served with Marine Corps reconnaissance patrols or Marine Corps reconnaissance units. Marine Corps Recon is the Special Forces branch of the United States Marine Corps. They go and do long range patrols. Go behind oftentimes go behind enemy lines or through the jungles. And but the Marine Corps does not have its own medics. They rely on the United States Navy to supply medics. And so I served as a combat medic with Marine Corps Special Forces and did 2 tours with the United States Marine Corps in Vietnam.
And just so ladies and gentlemen of the jury are clear, when you say Vietnam, that was a conflict situation.
It was in the Vietnam War, yes.
Now, at the time that you served in the Navy and you did the things that you described, was it like it is now where when you come out there's parades and statues and things of that sort?
No. When I came home from Vietnam, there were no parades for me and all of my colleagues that I fought with. And I know that for a short period of time after the war, I tried to conceal my service because people would make derogatory comments to me about serving my country in Vietnam.
How's your health today?
I'm generally in good health with the exception of my heart. I've had some heart problems now for several years, and I had to have a triple bypass operation several years ago.
And I'm sorry, and I failed to mention this, but when you left the military, can you tell us how you were discharged?
I received an honorable discharge, and as well as when I was in the Navy, I received a number of commendations for my service in combat zone.
At this point, Your Honor, we can mark this as, I guess this would be defense 1.
Okay.
May show it to the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
May I approach?
You may.
Mr. Miller, take a moment to look at what the marker is before. Do you recognize it?
I do.
And what is D1, sir?
D1 is my honorable discharge from the United States Navy 38 years ago, and signed by the commander of Central Command as well as my commanding officer, Commander Boyer.
Is that a true and accurate representation or copy of that discharge?
It is.
It's point, Your Honor, I move to have D1 entered into evidence.
Is there an objection from the Commonwealth? No objection.
May it be published to the jury, Your Honor.
Yes.
See, Mr. Ward. Or maybe not. Mr. Miller, take a moment to look at the document that's pictured on the screen behind you. Is that a copy of D1?
It is.
A copy of your discharge?
It is.
Now, based on your time in the military, are there different types of discharges?
There are, this is quite so many years ago, but my understanding at the time was that you could receive three types of discharges. You receive a dishonorable discharge, which reflects that you engaged in wrongdoing while in the service. You could receive a general discharge, which means that you did some bad things in the service, but not enough to earn a dishonorable discharge. And then you could receive an honorable discharge, which means that you served your country honorably during your service.
And you received honor?
Yes.
Now, when you were in California, let's talk a little bit about that. During that time period while you were there, did you purchase a firearm?
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, sir?
I purchased a Ruger P85 handgun at a licensed gun dealer.
At this point, Your Honor, I move the mark. This is D2.
Objection.
May I approach, Your Honor?
May.
Mr. Miller, take a moment to look at what's before me. Please do. You recognize that, sir?
It is. That's a receipt that from Dimmings Guns in Marta, California, reflecting my purchase of a Ruger P85, P85 9mm pistol, and reflecting that I paid for it.
And is that a true and accurate representation of the receipt?
It is.
So, Your Honor, may that be published to the jury?
Are you moving to evidence?
Yes, I'm moving to evidence.
Is there an objection from the Commonwealth?
No objection.
It will be received as Defense Exhibit 2 and will be published to the jury.
Let's see if we can get it. Mr. Miller, take a moment to look at the photograph that's on the screen. Document.
That is an accurate facsimile of the receipt from Dimmings Guns that you just showed me as Defendant's Exhibit 2.
And when you purchased that gun, you went through the standard course, background check, things of that sort?
Yeah, I mean, this was over 10 years ago, but my understanding is that my recollection is that I had to fill out and provide a criminal history as well as provide information about my Navy service, including my discharge information. And that was part of the background check that I needed to legally purchase the gun.
And when you moved to the state of Pennsylvania, you brought that weapon with you?
I did.
Once you arrived in Pennsylvania, did you take any steps to get a license here?
I did. I registered the firearm when I arrived in Pennsylvania.
In addition to registering the firearm, did you get a license in this state?
I did.
When we say license, what are we talking about?
Well, it's my understanding that you need to register and have a license to both possess and carry a firearm, and I received both of those.
At this point, Your Honor, I move the mark. This is D3.
No objection.
May I approach?
You may.
Mr. Miller, take a moment to look at what's been marked as D3. You recognize that, sir?
I do. That's my license I talked about, carrying a firearm. I'm allowed to, because of my background and the fact that I passed the background check, I'm allowed to carry a concealed weapon in Pennsylvania if I choose to do so. And this license allows me to do that.
Is this a true and accurate representation of how that license looks?
It is. This is the license.
May I publish that to the jury? I move into evidence D3 and I ask the publisher to the jury.
Is there an objection from the Commonwealth?
No objection.
It will be be received as Defense Exhibit 3, and you may publish to the jury.
Mr. Miller, take a moment to look at this form. It's ready.
That is an accurate facsimile of my license to carry a concealed firearm in the state of Pennsylvania, excuse me, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As you showed me, it's D3.
And the language that's listed on the license is contained or printed or shown on the screen.
It is.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention to the events of February 14th, 2012. Do you remember that morning?
Yes, I do.
At that time, do you recall where you were living at?
I was living at the residence address I detailed earlier in Belfont, in the
And
townhome.
that was with your wife and child at that time?
Well, it was my wife and her child. I was her stepfather.
All right. And as your stepfather, you were obviously assisting to raise her.
Yeah, I like Cindy a lot, and I treated her like she was my own daughter, and did a lot of things with her.
Now, that evening, when you went to bed, can you tell us about that?
Well, it was just like any other evening. I'm getting up there in age, and I go to bed and get a good night's sleep. That's one of the things my doctor told me about my heart condition is to get lots of sleep. And we went to bed like it was any other evening.
And when you went to bed, tell us your routine that you practiced at that time.
Well, one thing I did, what we always do before we go to bed, is we have a security system in the home. I activated the security system before I went to bed.
And when you went to bed, did you think or were you even conscious of the possibility of something happening that night?
Well, you always, that's why you set the alarm, because you never know what's going to happen. And, the only kind of lingering concern both my wife and I had to do with her former spouse. And that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to get an alarm system in the first place.
Now, at that time period when you would go to sleep, where did you typically store that weapon at?
The P85 handgun was in my nightstand, unloaded with a safety lock on.
And why was that?
Well, you always store a firearm with the safety lock because you don't want it to accidentally discharge. You also never store a firearm loaded, again, because you don't want the firearm to be accidentally discharged.
Sometime in the early morning hours of February 14th, were you awakened suddenly?
Yeah, at 4:30 in the morning, our alarm system went off. I went downstairs I went downstairs to check the alarm panel to see what the situation was, and I looked at the panel and it showed that someone was trying to enter our home through the basement patio door. At the same time, the alarm company called and spoke to my wife Joanne. She spoke to them briefly, and I then came. I tried to get it first. I tried to get the phone first, but she beat me to it and talked to them. I came back upstairs and talked with her and said someone's trying to break into the basement. I retrieved my firearm and told her to call 911 immediately. And then I went down to the basement to see what the problem was.
Now, when you retrieved your handgun, let's talk about that. What exactly did you do?
Well, the first thing I did is I took the safety lock off. You never store a firearm without a safety lock on, especially with a child in the house. So I took the safety lock off, and then I loaded the pistol, but I did not chamber a round in the pistol. What has to happen when you have a pistol and you put a magazine into it is you have to take an extra step of pulling the receiver back, and that forces around in the chamber. I specifically did not do that because I didn't know what the situation was, and I did, and I certainly didn't want to either accidentally discharge a weapon, and I also wasn't out to hurt anybody. I wanted to see what the situation was in the hopes that was someone trying to break into the home, they would see what I had and they would leave the premises.
So you go downstairs.
Yes.
What happens then?
Well, I go down, I turned on the light. We have an office area in the basement as well as Cindy's play area. And so there was no light outside. There was only light inside the home. And so I go downstairs and I see, really just an extremely large man trying to force open the door by yanking on the handle on the patio door. And he was a big guy. He had a pair of shorts on and that was it. But he was built. He was a mountain of a man. He was a big guy. And initially I said to him a couple times, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he just kept trying to open the door. So he did not. He kept trying to open the door.
So this man was naked except for a pair of shorts.
He had a pair. I don't know if he had any underwear on, but he had. All I saw and the clothing on him was a pair of shorts.
What are you thinking at this moment?
Well, first I was shocked. I was just kind of, what the heck is this guy doing here? Why is he trying to come in my house? But as things progressed, obviously my shock became, upset, concern, and then outright fear. Yeah.
And the door that he was trying to open or force, as you so described, tell us about the door. What did it look like?
It's a patio door, just like you have in a lot of people have in the back of their home. It's got it's like a door on runners, and then you open it and you pull it on the runner open, and it's just two glass windows there along with the runners and the doors. So it's got one panel that ordinarily wouldn't move, and then one on a slider that you could pull back and forth to go in and out of the home.
Now, some patios can have reinforced glass and others do not. Your patio, did they have reinforced glass?
It was standard glass. That's how the home was constructed, and it was just a standard glass window.
So to your knowledge, it wasn't bulletproof, shatterproof?
Absolutely, no. I know it wasn't bulletproof or shatterproof.
And besides the smell, do you have any lights that cover the exterior of the house?
The only thing that's out there is a yellow bug light, but on the evening in question, I don't remember if that was on, but I certainly don't remember seeing it. And it doesn't cast a lot of light anyway, it's just to attract those bugs.
So once the light was on in the room that you were in, could you see very far outside of that room?
I couldn't see any. The only thing I could see outside of the window was this large gentleman trying to open the door.
What happens then?
He finally, after I yelled at him a couple times, he took some steps back. I opened the door. I took the there's like a piece of metal that you can put in between the sliding door and the wall frame. So I took that security bar out. I opened the door, and he turned and took a few steps away. And I said, "Put your hands up. Get down on the ground." I was going to hold him there until the cops got there, and he initially did put his hands up. I told him to get on the ground a couple times. He wouldn't get on the ground. At the time I told him this, he was facing away from me. And he turned around and took his hands down and started to clench his hands back and forth like this, except they were down at his side.
And what are you thinking when you're seeing this?
Well, at that point in time, I realized that I should retreat into my home, and that's exactly what I did. I saw that, and I went from kind of, what the heck is this guy doing, to I'm starting to become alarmed.
Did you retreat to your home?
I most certainly did, and he followed me as I retreated into my home.
Did you lock the door as you retreated?
No, I walked backward, and every step that I took back, he took a corresponding step with me. And when by the time he got to the threshold, I was already back in the office area of the basement with my back up against the cabinet. And well, I don't know if remember if it was a wall or a cabinet, but I know I was backed up in the office. And he came walking in, and then I started to yell at him, you know, stop, stop. And he just kept coming. And he had this just kind of weird look on his face. And he just kept coming into my home. And so finally, when he took a couple steps into my house, I was so alarmed. And at that point, I was getting really afraid that I pulled the trigger on my pistol. And I had forgotten at that point that I didn't even load it. There wasn't a bullet in the magazine. So the pistol clicks, and then this just big grin comes across his face, almost like a sadistic grin. You know, like, ha ha, looks like you don't have any bullets in your gun. And then he took another step forward. I, used the, I cocked the gun and fired at that point.
And we've already seen a picture, and I don't believe it's been marked, so just for identification purposes, and for the record, can we mark a photograph of the Ruger
P85.
I'm sorry, P85, thank you, as D4, Your Honor?
Yes.
And may I display it on the chart for demonstrative purposes only?
Yes. Is there an objection from the council?
No objection.
Mr. Mayor, let's take a moment to look at what's marked as a D4 photograph. Is that the same type of weapon that we're talking about?
It is. That is a photograph of that exact model of handgun.
And how do you know that?
Well, may I stand up?
May he stand up?
Yes.
Along the receiver, it says right here Ruger P85, and then it also has the stock that I purchased, and it has the name Ruger here down at the bottom.
Makes sense, sir. And if you need to stand up, we can do that as well. Now, you testified that this individual was in your house. You said he was stocky, he was big. Bigger than you?
At the time, yeah. The past 2 years, I think age has caught up with me, so I put on a lot of weight. But at the time, he was much larger than I am. He's about 6 inches taller and had at least 120, 130 pounds on him.
You tell him to stop and you pull the trigger. Does he stop?
He never stopped.
So what
He after I fired, with I actually fired a bullet at him. I did hear him cry, say "ow," and then he, I fired at him several times. He finally left, was leaving the home, and he was on the ground, and then I stopped firing.
So you stopped firing once
Once he was on the ground, I fired until he was on the ground, and I knew he wasn't going to be a threat to me anymore. And so once I knew he was down, I stopped firing. I had more rounds in the clip at the time, but I stopped firing once he was down.
So you could have continued firing, but you didn't.
Yes,
And why was that?
he was down. I was, in the, it's obvious from my military service that I've knew how to use firearms and was trained how to use firearms. And when I was in Vietnam, well, the Navy corpsman is not ordinarily supposed to be involved in armed combat, but there were a lot of times when it was pretty hairy over there. And when the men will meet the meat, and I was trying to protect the Marines that were my brothers and a Marine that was fallen, and I was trying to protect him from being killed, I did use my weapon. And I was taught in the Navy and by the Marines I served with that you fire until you are sure that your target is incapacitated. And when I knew he was incapacitated, I stopped firing.
And on that night, were you firing to protect your family?
Yeah, that home that's my house, and I don't know what this guy's up to. I didn't know who he was. He had, initially when this happened, I was concerned that it may have been it may have been my wife's ex-husband. I wasn't thinking about that at the time, but certainly when the dust settled, I'm like, I was concerned. I thought, man, I bet that's my wife's ex-husband. Wasn't sure. I only met the guy a couple of times, but yeah, I wasn't going to let someone come into my home and hurt me and hurt my wife, and most importantly, hurt the 7-year-old stepdaughter that I loved. And when I told him to stop, and he didn't, and I was afraid. I was afraid I was going to get hurt. I can't, because of problems with my heart, really get into a physical confrontation. I've been advised to avoid strenuous exercise, and I wouldn't have been much of a match for him anyway. I'm 65 years old, and I got a bad heart, so I protected my family.
Now, after you protected your family, did the police come?
They did.
Tell us about that.
Well, the first thing I did after this happened, I was in shock for a while, but the first thing I did is I cleared the weapon. And what you have to do is, you make sure all the ammunition's out of it, you take the clip out. I took it upstairs and set it on the banister and waited for the police to come. And then when the police officer involved asked me questions about what occurred, I talked to him at length about what happened and signed signed a statement about what occurred that evening. And then he asked me to search the home, and I allowed him to search the home without hesitation.
You didn't attempt to leave?
I'm sorry?
You didn't attempt to leave the home?
No.
Didn't attempt to run?
No, absolutely not.
Attempt to get rid of the gun?
No.
You left it and the police retrieved it right from where you placed it for them?
Yeah, I took it upstairs and put it down, and they took possession of it.
And
I made sure that it was safe when I put it down. I took the ammunition out of it and put the safety on it.
now you said you made a statement. When you made that statement, you went with the police voluntarily.
Did.
You weren't under arrest at that time.
I was not. I was asked to give a statement about what happened by the officer, and I did so.
Mr. Miller, on that night, did you believe you had any other recourse than to fire that weapon?
No. Once I told him to stop twice when he was in my home. Then I actually pulled the trigger, and he heard the click. When you fire, it's called dry firing. And when you dry fire a handgun, there's a hammer. There's a hammer that you pull back, and then you pull the trigger, and it clicks. Click. So he knew that at that point I was really scared, and that I was going to take action to defend myself. And his response, when he knew that, when I told him to stop twice, and then I pulled the trigger on him because I was afraid he was going to hurt me, was to keep coming and then have a, I don't know what the proper term was, but it was, I'd maybe call it some sort of, it's like what you see in a horror movie. It's like a Hollywood grin from a horror movie. It's like that. Like, I got you now.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Further questions?
Cross-examination?
Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. Just
Good afternoon.
Again, walk through the sequence of events at issue here.
Sure, I'm happy to answer your questions.
You came down to the basement and the lights were on, correct?
I'm sorry?
When you first came down onto the basement,
Yes.
let's talk about what you knew. You knew the police were on their way, correct?
I had told my wife to call the police, so yes, I assume the police were on their way.
You knew that the alarm company knew about what was happening, correct?
Yes.
You came down into the basement and all the lights were on, correct?
No, I turned the lights on.
Okay. Either way, the lights were on.
Well, when I came down to the basement, I turned the lights on. Yes, the lights were on during the time period when I had this interaction.
And you saw the decedent. You didn't see that he had any weapons in his hands.
I did not see him, but I couldn't at the time he was at the door. I only saw one of his hands, the one that was pulling on the door. I couldn't see the other one, but, I didn't see any weapons, no.
You saw him pulling on the door, but at some point he actually stopped pulling on the door and walked away, right?
He did.
And it was only after he did that that you chose to walk over to that door and unlock it, right?
Yes, I unlocked the door.
And you removed the security bar,
I
right?
did. Yes,
And you actually walked outside, right?
I did.
Okay. So at some point, because you actually went outside voluntarily, there comes a point that the man is in your basement, right?
Well, there were many events that transpired between when I walked outside and when he came into my basement. So I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Well, specifically what I'm asking you is, at first, you go outside, you tell him to put his hands up. He complies, right?
Yes,
You see that he doesn't have any weapons.
yes,
He's only wearing gym shorts, so obviously there's nowhere that he could have concealed a weapon, right?
no, I don't agree with that. I didn't know what was outside my home. I didn't know if there was a weapon concealed elsewhere. I don't know if he had a weapon concealed in his shorts. I can tell you that he did not have any weapons in his hands.
You don't know what else was outside your home that you left voluntarily. Okay.
Yes, correct.
So, after he puts his hands up, you retreat, he retreats, and then you fire that first shot.
No, that's not how things occurred. I asked him to put his hands up, and then I asked him to get on the ground several times. He refused to do so, and then turned around and made gestures to me that I interpreted as being a physical menace.
Okay.
And then I once I saw that, I withdrew into my home. And he followed me into the home, refused my instructions to stop, didn't stop when I dry fired my weapon in his direction.
Could I just stop you, because you've actually already gone through all this with your counsel. So I'm just trying to get other points that you didn't already cover with your counsel. So
Ma'am,
if you could just try to answer my questions, I would
ma'am, I am
very much
answering.
appreciate it.
Ma'am, I am answering your question.
Mr. Miller,
Yes, ma'am.
let's not go back and forth, Ms. Robinson. Ms. Robinson, please ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. My apologies, Your Honor.
I asked. You said in your statement you shoot him once or twice in your basement, you don't remember. And then he says, ow, right?
The preface of your question is incorrect.
Mr. Miller, you can explain.
Okay, ma'am, I apologize. I just don't want to incur the courts to, or not do something I'm not supposed to. This is an unfamiliar territory for me. I fired at him 4 times inside the basement.
Okay. You fired him some number of times in your basement, and the shell casings, we went through the detective where they were, so. Anyway, after you fired him, he begins retreating, right?
Yes,
And at some point, his back is to you, right?
yes, when he's outside.
Okay. So he's actually walking away from you, and you're pursuing him at this point, right?
Yes,
And you fire at him 2 more times, correct?
yes,
And you fire into his back. His back, he's walking away from you, and you're firing at him, right?
I'm not sure I would describe it as walking, but yes, I fired into his back twice after once I left the threshold of the basement.
And you were here when the coroner testified, right? So we know that at least one of those bullets severed his spinal cord, right?
Well, I was here when the coroner testified and heard him say that, yes, and I don't have any
So-
reason to doubt that aspect of his testimony.
So after that bullet, he wasn't going anywhere, right? He was on the ground.
I stopped firing when he fell to the ground, yes.
Now, your counsel asked you what you did after this. You didn't go and see if maybe he was savable, if he was still alive, because you knew he was dead, right?
No,
Oh, so he actually could have been on the ground lying there alive, and you didn't try to go assist him in any way?
I didn't try to assist him in any way. I don't know what his condition was. I know that I went back into my home, closed and locked the door, and went back upstairs and then secured the firearm.
So it didn't matter to you if he was still alive and he could have been saved? You just didn't care, huh?
Of course it mattered to me.
Then why didn't you go see
I didn't know
what his condition
I
was?
didn't know what his condition was. I certainly wasn't going to go up to him and poke him or prod him or ask him any questions. The man was in my home. He refused to leave. And as soon as I was sure that I was safe, I closed and locked the door and went upstairs.
You were asked some questions about your military training. And you testified that you were asked, you shoot until incapacitated, correct?
I stated that, yes, that's what I was trained.
When you talked to the police, you said to the police that you were actually trained to shoot until dead, right?
Well, obviously being dead is being incapacitated, but I don't remember. If you want to refresh my recollection, show me my statement. Those events were much closer in time to this, and if I said that, then I don't have any reason to doubt that that's what I stated.
Okay. Your Honor, his statement's already been marked as Commonwealth 4. Do you have a copy, sir?
I do not. I could get a copy readily if you like. Mr. Goodman, my statement's on the table.
I got it.
Okay.
What page am I?
Okay. Your Honor. Page 24, line 39. Question, when you shot the man this morning, did you use tactics you learned in the military? Answer, yes. I kept firing until the threat was dead. Is that the question that was asked? Is that the answer that you gave at that time?
Well, you didn't read the entire answer. It says, and I'll read the entire answer if I may. It says, yes, I kept firing until the threat was dead. That is what you were taught. And yes, I said that in response to the detective's questions.
Did you receive any training in the military? Did the military train you that you're supposed to use these military tactics at all times?
Of course not.
Okay. So on that morning, you knew that you're not in a wartime situation and you don't just fire at someone until you're sure they're dead, right?
Well, I've never been in a situation like I was early that morning, except at this time, except when I was in the military.
It didn't answer my question.
I understand that. I'm just prefacing.
Are you making an objection?
Maybe you
Yeah,
could.
I'm
Maybe I don't want.
objecting-
Maybe
I'm
I-
objecting to
There's
the
an
statement
objection.
is non-responsive.
Sustained.
Would you
Ms.
ask?
Robinson, please ask your question again, and Mr. Miller, please answer the question that's asked.
Apologies, Your Honor.
Wish we had a recorder because I don't even remember exactly what it was. On that morning, you knew you weren't supposed to use military tactics and shoot this man until you were sure he was dead, right?
No. I was threatened. I was afraid. I protected my family, and I made sure that threat wasn't going to hurt me.
So
And-
you're
And I fired until that threat was neutralized.
Were you afraid when he was walking away from you?
You mean that when I first opened the door? Is that
No,
what
I
you're
mean,
referring to?
when you shot him the 5th and 6th times when he was walking away from you. Were you afraid
The-
at that
the-
point?
These things happen in a series of seconds. And so I'm backed up against the wall in my home. This man, a huge man who could have easily taken me in a physical confrontation, you know, with fisticuffs or wrestling or whatever you want to call it, who could easily defeat me and hurt me very badly. You know, refused my command for him to stop. He entered my home. He kept coming at me after I dry fired my gun, and then, you know, yeah, I was scared, and I fired at him until he was down. He was in my house. He was threatening me, and I was afraid. Absolutely, and I was afraid. And I was, you know, after this was over, I was in shock. It was just awful, and, you know, yeah, I was afraid.
So this man that was so much bigger than you, again, this is the man that you chose to unlock the door and confront, right?
Yes.
Okay. Finally, you were asking questions about your wife's ex-husband, and I just want to go over with you what you told the detective about that. And, Your Honor, if I may publish part of Commonwealth 4.
In evidence, you may.
This is page 27, lines 56 to 58, or 59, excuse me. The detective at that time asked you, did you believe the man at your back door was Joanne Lowell's estranged husband? Answer, no. Is that what the detective asked you, and is that what you told him?
I did initially tell the detective that I thought it may have been Rick Lowell. But at the time I was interviewed, I said, no, it wasn't.
So, wait, I'm sorry, I didn't follow you. Are you saying that that wasn't that this is not an accurate transcription of what?
No, I'm saying that if you read 2 questions down, the detective reflects that I initially told him that I thought it may have been Rick Lowell.
Your counsel can get there with you.
No objection, our argument.
Sustained.
I'm asking the simple question. Is that what the detective asked you, and is that what you told him?
Yes, I said that before.
And further down, the detective again specifically asked you, at any time during this shooting, did you believe the man was Rick Lowell? And you said no, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. And line 58. You initially told the detective what, sir?
Well, if I may read from my statement, I told him the man had the same build and color hair as Lowell. I thought it might be Lowell after the shooting if the guy had tattoos on his arms.
And you knew that Rick was a pretty dangerous character, correct?
I know in the past that Rick had threatened my wife and that she had a protection from abuse order against him, and that they had a very difficult marriage where he she never really told me about it. I certainly surmised that Rick Lowell physically abused my wife when he was married.
And in fact, strike that. Were you aware of the fact that he had threatened to kill you?
I was aware that he had threatened to kill me, her, and Cindy. I believe he threatened to kill Cindy. I know it was me and her. And if my memory serves me correctly, this was many years ago. I do remember he made some threat against Cindy as well.
And when the individual that invaded your house went back outside of your house, did you know he had any weapons out there?
I didn't know what was outside of that.
And were you going to wait until he retrieved the ones to come back?
No. That's why I tried to detain him until the police got there.
Mr. Miller, on that night, today as you stand in the courtroom, did you have any other option for what you did?
No.
Is there any recross from the Commonwealth?
So your testimony for the jury is that you didn't have the option of simply keeping the door closed, staying in your home, and waiting for the police to arrive?
I don't understand the question.
Your counsel just asked you if you had any other option that night. Didn't you have the option of keeping the door closed, staying in your home, and waiting for the police to arrive?
At what point in time?
When you first went into the basement and saw that someone was trying to get in. And in fact, when the decedent...
You know, it's easy to sit here 2 years after the fact and Monday morning quarterback things. And maybe if I had to do over again, I wouldn't have gone out of the house. I agree with you. But when I shot the decedent in this case, he was in my home. I told him to stop twice, and I dry fired at him, and he
Object,
kept
Your
coming.
Honor. It's non-responsive. Can I strike all of that as, move to strike all of that as non-responsive to your question? The question was very simple, and I think we'll let the jury weigh.
I answered.
the
I answered.
reasonable-
Oh, Mr. Miller, there's no question pending. Ms. Robinson, do you have any further questions?
Oh. No, not at this
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions from the defense?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you're excused.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, counselors.
Defense, please call your next witness.
Remain, Your Honor, at this point. I believe we moved into evidence all of our exhibits, but if there's something I missed, I'm going to have it into.
Okay. And anything else from the defense?
Go ahead, one moment, please.
You may.
Mr. Bias.
At this point, Your Honor, there is nothing further from the defense, so with the entry of our exhibits into evidence at this point, for the defense first.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 5-minute break. You don't need to go anywhere. You can just stay right out there for a few minutes and we'll call you right back in. We have one legal matter to discuss and then we're going to continue on to our closing arguments. Okay, thank you.
You want this horse?